So in terms of compassion, I tend to be a fairly compassionate professor already. I think that comes with the territory of being trained as a clinical psychologist. But I was even more so during this time. So in terms of my individual approach, I really tried to keep in mind that not only were students dealing with their individual struggles with the pandemic, but also we were dealing with what the American Psychological Association termed an epidemic of racism in our country that really was coming to a head, coming to fruition during this time where years of people trying to speak up were finally coming to the forefront. So I was really trying to recognize that particularly our Black, Indigenous, people of color students were dealing with more than just the pandemic. I also really tried to hold space for students who wanted to talk individually, staying after class, or I have set up video conferencing, either Zoom, Meet, Teams, whatever they want to use, office hours, so that they can sign up for a time that works for them. We sit and chat, it's just the two of us, they have that space just with me. And then at the class level, I really challenged myself to acknowledge, not ignore, events going on outside the classroom. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute related to the attack of the Capitol on January 6th of 2021. I also really made an effort to engage in radical honesty and self-disclosure. So I had a hard time navigating our policies on campus for when I was allowed to come back after my family did experience COVID. And there was a class I came to and I hadn't been able to pull myself together and I was still tearful. And the students were very supportive. And I think they really appreciated that I didn't try to just put on a brave face, and I acknowledged to them that I was struggling too. So speaking of January 6th, so when that attack on democracy occurred, I was teaching a class on psychology and film, memoir, and science, which I had already made efforts to add diversity to the syllabus in terms of what we were reading, the directors and actors in the films we were watching, things along those lines. And in fact, on that day, we had just watched the film Black Klansman. So certainly related, relevant, right? And when I was sort of watching all this go down over Twitter and various other things, I just sat there and said, I can't expect my students to pretend like nothing's happening, particularly considering somewhere between 40 and 50% of my class was students of color. So I sent this out. I'm presenting it to you in raw format, so there are typos. So I said in lieu of instead of in light of the attempted coup at the Capitol by domestic terrorists. You have my permission to just turn in comments and or thoughts you are having right now in place of assignments 3 and 4. If you'd rather be distracted and completing the original discussion assignments will help, feel free to do so. Take care of yourselves. See you tomorrow at 9 on Zoom, where we can create a space to talk about everything going on together. And we did. And every single one of my students, all my students of color, my students without cameras on, spoke about how that affected them individually. And some of them were able to tie it to the material we've been covering as well. Here are some of the comments I've received on evals related to compassion. Created a safe space to talk about hard things and make everyone feel equal and heard. Dr. Myers has made me feel like I personally matter to her as a person and not just a student. She cares about students, is understanding of busy life for a student, cares about individuals. This next snippet actually comes from a letter of recommendation that one of my students wrote for my application for full professor this year. And he was kind enough to email to me. And I'm going to try to get through this without being emotional, and you'll see why in a minute. So we had a psychology major die by suicide on our campus last year. And this reflects that. And that is also something I was very open about talking about in class. In my last semester at Virginia Wesleyan, we lost one of my friends to suicide, who was also a psychology major. If there was any VW staff member that took my emotions, mental state, and grades into consideration, it was Dr. Myers. She doesn't even know that after his passing, there were days I did not want to be bothered with any type of class, yet her love and warmth that she had filled her class with gave me the extra push I needed for that day. Her emails throughout the semester, just to make sure I was okay, encouraged me to keep pushing towards graduation. The smallest things we do matter to our students.